working in the army, and then there was a really big man, like 7 feet or something, big called Goliath, who challenged what?
Okay, listen to the story because he's doing a great job of telling it, and there's a reason
Who
for him.
said, I will challenge any Israelite, and if you win, all of my guys will be your slave, and if I win, all your guys will be my slave. And
Well,
so then David won.
Okay, David won. That's kind of the end of the story. Now, he did a really good job. In fact, he gave you even more information. David was a young shepherd boy. And what he did was he volunteered to go out and fight against the bad guys. They were called the Philistines. And they had a guy on their side who was huge. And his name was Goliath. And because he was so huge, all the Israelites were so afraid of him. Do you think anybody would volunteer to go out and fight against somebody that big and that strong? And, you know, think of these famous basketball players. They could be 7 feet tall. Maybe they were 7. Come on in.
I should have to count how many people are here.
Okay. Anyway, there's some things about this story, and I'm going to read it to you. So those of you that don't know it really well, there, Remy, you can sit right there. Okay. David didn't go out and fight Goliath with a sword. He used what we call a slingshot. Now, a slingshot is something that I know about, because when I was a kid, the boy, not the girls, the boys played with slingshots, and we used these little berries. They're called China berries. And I'll bet you never even heard of China berries. I'll get you a boys now. But anyway, that's what David used, a slingshot. It's kind of shaped like this, and it's got, the ones that I remember have kind of a piece of rubber, and you pull it back, and you pull it back, and you let it go, and whoosh, it flies through the air. And it could even maybe break a window if you use these little China berries. But that was a big deal that David was able to kill this giant with a little slingshot. Now, quickly, Ryan.
Well, I know what a China berry is, and he used a sling, which is the long leather thing that you spin around and fling the rock out. If he didn't use a slingshot, the
well,
wide
that's the kind I remember. And there were two kinds in David's day. They didn't have that because they didn't have rubber bands to pull back. And Preston knew that too, right? Okay, now, the slingshot is one of the most interesting things about the story, and the fact that Goliath was so big and so strong. He was way bigger than any of the other men in his army. And he was scary looking, and everybody was afraid. So we've got a giant guy, we've got a slingshot, and we've got he was almost a young boy. He could even have been a teenager, like 18 or 19, who said, I'll fight against Goliath, I'm not afraid. Oh. And everybody said, duh, I don't think so. But those are the main parts of the story. That he used this slingshot. He hit Goliath in the forehead with a stone, a rock. Now, I don't know how big the rock was. I don't think it was as big because it was almost like a little pebble, okay? That's part of the story. And the fact that Goliath was so big and scary. Now, think about those things. And then before I read you all the details of the story, I want you to think about this. We usually think of somebody that's big, really big, that they're strong, and they can do all kinds of amazing things if they're big and strong. And I guess that's what people thought about Goliath, but they were really scared of him. Now, I want you to think about Jesus. We've seen a million pictures of Jesus, drawings, paintings, but Jesus was probably about a regular-sized person, wasn't he? Probably about, there was nothing that was especially big about Jesus. He was just the size of a regular man. But think about God. We can't see God. But if he rules all of heaven, he must be pretty big too, don't you think? Kind of makes you wonder just how big is he? And when we think of Goliath being such a big man and God being so big in all of heaven, you kind of wonder, kind of makes me think about being strong. We know God is so strong, he can do anything. And Goliath thought he was strong enough. But now I want you to think about one more thing, and this is a true story. There were two sisters that were teenagers who lived on a farm somewhere, I don't know, maybe Illinois or Indiana, somewhere up north in one of our states. And this happened just about 2 weeks ago. It's a true story. These two sisters came home from school and they lived on a farm. And their dad was out plowing his fields with his tractor. And it was huge. The tractor was huge. But somehow, when the father was getting off the tractor, somehow it either rolled over or something there, and the father was pinned underneath. He couldn't get out. And can you imagine how afraid he must have been, the pain? And they're out in the middle of a field. Well, these two young daughters, who were both teenagers, were so scared that their father was stuck under the tractor. They did call 911, that's important, and they were smart enough to do that. But then the two girls reached down and they were able to lift this not lift it off the ground, but lift it up just enough to get their father out. That tractor weighed thousands of pounds. Nobody could do that.
But
Maybe God was helping them, huh? They were so afraid that their dad was going to be hurt. They had so much strength.
did the tractor tip over or
It kind of like it tipped over. I'm not sure about the details, Alex.
So the doors went on there?
That is a good question. I can't answer that, but I know the important part of the story was that these two people had amazing strength to lift that tractor up just enough that they could slide it out. I bet all of the adults in the church tonight wouldn't have enough strength to lift that up. But these girls just had this incredible power. And I was hearing that story and it reminded me of David. Maybe when David got that slingshot with God's help, he was strong enough to throw it and hit that giant right in the head. It was an amazingly thing that he did. And where did he get that strength? Did God give it to him?
Yeah.
Where did these girls get? Who knows? But they were able to do it. So when you think about the story of David and Goliath, sometimes you can think of other things that kind of fit together. Alvin?
I noticed he got all sliced up. Did he survive?
Excuse me?
Did he survive?
Yes, he did. I don't know about his injuries or anything, but Alvin, the really incredible part of the story is that these two young teenage girls, because they were so scared for their dad, somehow they had enough strength to lift this up and slide him out. And when I think about Goliath being so big and strong and David being just a young man that could throw that and could do that, it kind of makes you think about it in a little different way. Alex?
I think how the tractor tipped over is because I think the enemy and God were having a battle, and the enemy accidentally shot the tractor and it tipped it over.
Well, sometimes you can think about that. I mean, maybe it's just a simple accident. Who knows? But when people have amazing strength, I just have a feeling that God was helping them have the strength, just like David had the strength to stop this evil man. And you know what? I'm going to read the story, and then you're going to get some more details.
Oh,
And here it is. Now, it doesn't say David and Goliath, but it says David and the giant. And he was a giant. Okay. The people of Israel saw that other nations had kings to rule them, and they demanded that they should have a king too. great prophet Samuel asked God for his approval. He was told to choose a man called Saul from the tribe of Benjamin to be the first king of Israel. Okay? Now, King Saul won many victories against Israel's enemies, but he didn't always do what God wanted. And that happens all the time, doesn't it, in the Bible? So God told Samuel that Saul's sons would never, ever be king. God ordered Samuel to travel to Bethlehem to find a shepherd boy, not a man, but a boy called David, the youngest son of a man called Jesse. It was David, this young boy, that God wanted to be the next king of Israel. So Samuel did that, and he gave David a special blessing. And from then on, God was always with David. Now, King Saul's army often had to fight their enemies, the Philistines, because they were constantly invading Israel's territory. And every Israelite who could be spared was called to defend their land. In other words, they had to kind of be soldiers to keep these bad guys away. So all the soldiers were there. Even Jesse's other sons were soldiers to fight against the Philistines. But one day, Jesse sent his son David off with food, just like Ryan said, with food for his sons who were fighting against the enemy. And David reached the camp as the battle was beginning. And the armor, that means they had shields and things to protect them, and big swords and all, helmets. And the armored soldiers were marching toward the battlefield. Suddenly, they all turned and came running back in fear. "Whatever is going on?" David called as one terrified soldier ran past. The man shouted, "Look!" Then he pointed behind him. Striding out big steps in front of the Philistine army was a warrior more enormous than David could even have imagined. He was almost twice as big as everyone else. "Run away if you like," the giant bellowed. See, look, there's his face. Can you see him? Pretty scary looking, huh?
Giant doesn't.
That would be funny.
His face is very
That would be
beautiful.
funny if they were like looking.
Yeah, it would be, but let's see what happens next. Now, the giant said, "There is no need to do battle if you're too cowardly. So just send one person out to fight me," he said. "And whoever wins will be in charge of everybody. So they'll not, if the Israelites win, then the Philistines won't fight them anymore. And if the Philistines win, the Israelites won't fight them anymore." Okay, now, is any of you men ready to take on this challenge? He smashed his mighty spear against his shield and threw back his head and roared. And the noise crashed around the hills like thunder. David was furious. How dare he talk to us like that? It's an insult, not to us, just to us, but to our God. "Just let me at him," he said. "Out of the pastures, I have killed lions, I've killed bears when they've attacked my father's sheep, and I can do the same for this guy too. God protected me, and he's going to protect me now." "Well," said Saul, looking around for other volunteers. "You think anybody else is going to volunteer?" No way. Nobody was forthcoming. "Very well," Saul said, and God be with you. So, now, you would think if you're going to go out to fight against someone, you'd want an armor, you'd want something to protect you, and a big sword, and helmet, and all that good stuff.
But these
But
days,
you know
no.
what? David said, forget it. David said this was too big and too bulky. He couldn't move with all this stuff on. So David took it off, and he just had his regular clothes on. He walked out toward that giant, and Goliath took a look at him. And he was, what? You're sending a boy out to fight against me? I'm Goliath. So, Goliath was almost furious. I mean, he was insulted. He
Yeah.
thought it'd be somebody pretty big and strong to fight against him. But David carried his staff, you know, a lot of the sticks that they use, the big strong staffs for sheep. Well, he had one of those. He took his slingshot and he took 5 smooth stones.
It must be
And
wicked.
King Saul and his army watched in amazement. The giant was roaring with laughter and watching this little boy, this young boy, walking toward him with a shepherd's sling. The young boy was yelling back at Goliath, I'm going to slay you in the name of God. So the shepherd boy stood firm. The giant came toward him, holding his spear. Then David raised his slingshot, whirled it around, and a stone struck Goliath in his forehead. Now, this is a huge man, crashing him to the ground. Dead. King Saul and his whole army cheered. David pulled out the sword and even cut off his head. And the Philistines, when they saw what had happened to their hero, their biggest soldier, guess what they did? They ran away. Careful, my name and fall. And look, now this picture really shows you how small David was. There's his little slingshot. And here is this huge man. But David's slingshot was sharp enough and he was strong enough. Who made David strong enough? God made it strong enough. Maybe God made those girls strong enough to lift that. But look what happened. And the Philistines ran away. And from then on, David grew and grew. He began to do more and more good things. And eventually he became the king of all of Israel. But you know, he could never have done that by himself, could he? He needed that strength from God.
In the VeggieTales movie, there when he cut off his head, there might have been pickle juice all over.
Well, that would be preferable.
Giant pickle? Yeah.
Yes, ma'am.
It's VeggieTales. What do you want?
Yeah.
Okay.
How do you cucumber? This giant. Who killed him? Tomato?
How do you get what?
Oh, so tall and.
You know, that makes me wonder. You know, I think maybe
You gotta be
he
natural.
was so much, he was just a giant. That's all there were. And that's not I mean, we think it's a real story. It wasn't like he was a giant in fairy tales, that kind of thing. He was just that big. And if he was that big and that strong and that powerful, only God could make David even stronger and more powerful. And David was just an interesting story. Okay, it's almost time. Let's fold our hands. Dear Jesus, thank you for the amazing things you do in our life, how you can make us strong to do good things for you, and we are so grateful that you are always on our side. and bless this food, and let's